Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, where we put racial equity front and center. Join us as we explore equity. We'll take a look at overcoming opportunity gaps and strategies that ensure equitable learning experiences for all students in JCPS.
Welcome to the Pillar Podcast. Today I'm your host, Dwan Williams, a racial equity specialist in DEP, and we have a wonderful guest today, and it's Dr. Stephanie White, who is our diversity hiring specialist. Welcome, Dr. Stephanie White. So good to have you here today. Here in JCPS, as you know, we have 3 pillars, and we have backpack success skills, racial equity, and culture and climate. Today, I think what you're going to be able to hear is that Dr. White has her hands and impact in all 3 pillars, and through an equity lens. So let's just get started. So I know that Dr. White, you're the diversity hiring specialist. What is your role in hiring, and what's your role in diversity?
Well, first, thank you for having me today. So my role with diversity hiring in DEP is to do a couple of things. One, I collaborate with human resources to ensure that we have a fair and equitable hiring process. I also help to attract, recruit, and retain talent in leadership, which includes in the school level, counselors, assistant principals, and I also participate with the principal slating committee, as well as in central office. I work to support hiring leaders in grades 8 and above, which is like a associate or specialist all the way up to the chief level, to support diverse hiring through equitable processes and to really try to promote having leadership that more closely reflects our student demographics in our district.
Excellent. Wow. So you do a lot.
I do.
Do a lot there. So what does diversity hiring specialists look for within an organization? So specifically like JCPS.
Well, I think the biggest thing for people in this type of role or any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion role is the commitment from leadership. One of the things that is unique to JCPS is that our leadership structure, our superintendent, leads through an equitable lens, and he is steadfast in trying to promote racial educational equity for all students. So I think that commitment is key. Just looking at other positions around the state, around the country really, you see that many companies went to hiring someone in diversity, equity, inclusion, especially in the wake of the social unrest we've had most recently. However, you see people leaving those roles because they don't feel like they have the support from leadership to be able to make real changes. So one thing about JCPS that I enjoy especially is that we do have that commitment at the top, and which permeates all of our work throughout the district. So I think with our board and our superintendent setting that tone, it really supports the work that we're able to do.
That's awesome. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, which is my next question, which is around how did your position come about? I know you mentioned the boards involved and the superintendents that have been heavily involved in the position. So how did it come about?
Well, in 2018, the Jefferson County Board of Education unanimously passed a policy entitled the Commitment to Racial Educational Equity. So with that policy, this position was created. So I'm not the first to be in the position. There was someone here before me. But the position was created specifically in the Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Department to support human resources and to collaborate so that we can increase diverse hiring in JCPS. So that's how the position originated, and that's one of the reasons why it is not included in human resources, in the human resources department, is because they want to keep the job specific to the mission of supporting diversity. So that's why it's continued to be housed in DEP.
That makes sense, but you work with multiple departments, obviously.
Absolutely. I collaborate with human resources on a daily basis. I work with in diversity, equity, and poverty. I work with Jasmine Drinkard, who is a diversity manager, and she runs the employee resource affinity groups. So that deals a lot with retention of employees. So I work very closely with her, with Dr. Marco Munoz. Work, of course, within HR. I work with the administrative specialist, Dylan Owens and his team. So I work with many people to ensure that our hiring practices are appropriate and support hiring candidates that are not only diverse, but any candidate that we're hiring, we want to ensure that they are able to demonstrate an understanding of cultural competence and how to mitigate their own implicit bias, especially in the educational setting.
That makes sense. So, just thinking here, in your role, what kind of how do you support principals?
Well, supporting principals, there's a few things that I do. So, the major thing is I consult with principals to discuss the role that they're hiring for. So, for example, there may be a counselor, there may be an assistant principal. So, we spend time talking about what exactly they're looking for in that role. So not only the fact that there's a job description associated with those positions, but what kind of impact are you looking for this candidate to have? What kind of expertise are you looking for them to bring to the role? Because, for example, you may have in a high school 3 to 4 assistant principals, 3 to 4 counselors, and each one of those individuals have a specific piece of the pie, something that they're responsible for, something that they're accountable to. So we really try to work to identify what those things are so that we can try to narrow down to the best candidate to fill the need of the school and that position. So I do that. Also help principals construct questions, and I use some information based on Cullen's research around hiring for cultural competence, because again, while we want to increase diversity, we also want to make sure that any candidates that we are hiring and moving forward in the hiring process, that they understand cultural competence and can demonstrate how they have used it in their practices over the years or how they support students from diverse cultures, because our district is now a majority minority population. So we want to ensure that whomever we're putting in front of our children are able to have those, students are able to enjoy those mirrors of themselves and see that representation, as well as windows to other cultures that they may or may not be familiar with.
So your work really touches on multiple role groups, it sounds. So that is, not only are you working to consult with diversity hiring of principals, but also working with principals to make sure the diversity hiring is appropriate and really robust within their own hiring of teachers and APs. Would you say that's correct?
I'd say that's correct. Like, my primary role is to support them with counselor and assistant principal roles. However, I do tell all principals they can consult me about any position that they hire. I've talked to people about hiring mental health counselors, family resource coordinators, teachers, even homeschool coordinators. So any position that they're hiring, I am happy to consult with. As far as my role, job description, I typically work with leadership positions. However, I'm here to help principals in any way that I can. So if they have questions, I'm happy to answer them or find the answers if it's something that I don't know. I do things like I said, help them construct questions. If they have a large candidate pool, give them some suggestions for maybe narrowing candidates. Just really try to help them have everything that they need for the hiring process, as well as provide them evidence for their equity progress monitoring tool. So anytime that I'm working with a principal, I want them to leave with documentation of our work, because that supports that school's racial equity plan and the evidence they need for that documentation.
So it's real systemic changes, really. I mean, it's real systemic impact, not just in one role, not in one area, but all the way down from top to bottom and bottom up. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's crucial that we look at it holistically, because when you start looking at things in isolation, then you have isolated results. But with JCPS and this work with racial equity being led by DEP, we're trying to have systemic changes because we've had structural issues in our city and across the country. So when we look at how do we make this better for students, how do we make this better for families, it can't be a one, two, or three bullet points. It has to be a how do we move a system. It can be very daunting to try to make that turn, but I think that with the commitment that we have from our leadership, with the work that we're doing systemically in JCPS, I think it makes it much easier to affect change over a broader span. So we want to make sure that all the pieces do connect, and that people can see the connection, because we're not trying to hide it. We want to make sure it's very transparent, so that not only can you see it, you're experiencing it, you're feeling it, but we really need people to see the end goal of what's possible through this work.
The impact, the true impact, and not that it's something in addition to, but it's actually part of the work that you're doing and then how it impacts the entire educational system. That's awesome. So it sounds like you have a lot of experience, and so one may ask, but what qualifies you to consult a principal about being a principal? Have you ever been a principal?
I have. I was a principal for 6 years. I taught middle school English language arts to start, and I've been an assistant principal. So I have K-12 experience because I was a principal at the elementary school level. I've worked as an administrator in both middle school and high school. So I have a K-12 perspective on JCPS. I even started as a substitute. So I even have that lens to go back to. So through my work with principals, it is comfortable for me to work with them and to be able to understand their needs and even anticipate some of those needs. Because if I'm working with a new principal, they may not know what questions to ask yet. So being able to be from that role group, I think has really been helpful with helping principals navigate hiring processes and other things that they need to support their schools.
It probably even helps with buy-in with the principals, with some of the consultation that you provide.
Absolutely, I think it helps because sometimes it's difficult to take advice from somebody who hasn't been in the seat. And I do think that the principal chair is a very unique position in the district. It can be lonely, it can be isolating, it can be exciting and rewarding, and it can be never ending. So I think that anything that I'm able to do to support that role group essentially supports students, which is why we're all here to begin with.
That's right. So you mentioned, okay, so you have your principal background, and then your role also kind of is quasi, HR as well. So what kind of experience or certifications are needed or that you want to acquire in your current role as a diversity hiring specialist? Okay,
so in this role, like I said, I've been a principal, gone through K-12 system, also have my superintendent's license as part of my PhD program. And also, I'm currently working on my SHRM certification, which is the Society for Human Resource Management. And this is something specific to HR and that world, but that's something I want to be better in so that I can better support not only principals, but our central office staff as we're hiring, and be a better collaborator with our human resources department. So that's something that...
that's really smart.
Yeah, something that I've been able to do with the support of Dr. Marshall. So I'm very excited to embark on that because it makes me a little stronger and helps build capacity so that I can better help everyone around.
Now, you spoke about how you provide support to principals. Do you provide direct service consultation to other role groups? And if so, what types of services or support do you provide those employees?
Well, I also consult and work with central office hiring managers as well, and I'm part of the interview process. With schools, I'm invited to participate in the interview process, but with central office, I am supposed to be there. So it's one of those things where I sit in with interviews in all different areas, which has been very informative for me as far as recruiting as well, because I have a better understanding of all the pieces that are within JCPS and all the different departments that work interdependently throughout our district to support students. And I also provide services to aspiring leaders. So for example, I do some mentoring. I review resumes and letters of interest and provide feedback, mock interviews, advice. I do professional developments. We actually have a hiring series coming up for aspiring administrators that I'm doing in collaboration with you and with Dylan and with Faith Stroud. So we're trying to make sure that we have a cohesive support system for aspiring leaders, and just make sure that we have information out there and that is transparent and everyone has access to it.
It's awesome. So I can really see and understand how you can be an impact and a resource to multiple role groups. But let's just, for a moment, just for our listeners, I think they would be interested in just to learn a little bit about you. I know we jumped into the diversity hiring specialist part of it, but just about you and some of your background. So I know you stated that you've been in education for a little while. How long have you been in education?
17 years. This is year 17.
Okay, so did you originally go to college to be a teacher?
No. I originally went to college to be an engineer, but then speed school, it was not fun for me. So I switched to arts and sciences. I've always enjoyed English and writing. So I have a bachelor's degree in English. Did not have teaching on my radar, much to my mother's chagrin. But so I've done a lot of different things. I studied film and video production. Then I moved to California because I wanted to be a cinematographer.
Oh, wow.
And then from there, I ended up moving back. Of course, that wasn't going fast enough for me. And then, so just being back at home, worked a few different jobs. I've probably had, I don't know, 30, 40 jobs over my life from a teenager. But I'm all about finding something that I enjoy and that I feel like I can grow with. So I've done a lot of different things. But the good thing is that some of those pieces come back to help now. For example, with the film, video production, that kind of thing, taking pictures. I'm doing a series in Vision Equity where I'm celebrating schools who have a diverse teaching staff or a certified staff. So I've been able to go out and talk to principals and kind of get their stories. So I'm trying to tell the story of diversity in our district and tell the story of why it's important so that people can see it not only from a perspective of being compliant with a policy or trying to change a narrative, but what impact it has on school buildings and the children within the buildings and the families. Because I think that that's the piece that people have to identify with. Which
is changing the narrative, because you know there's a certain narrative out there about certain groups of people or demographics or racial groups, and having those stories told would help then change perspectives, hopefully.
Yes, that's the plan. So I think that everyone likes a good story, and these are the stories that affect our children every day in this district. So I think it's important to showcase that.
So my next question was, and which you kind of answered that, which is how do you draw from those experiences in your daily work? But it sounds like you're doing a lot of that, especially with the film series that you're trying to introduce.
Yeah, so it's actually more of a written series, but I'm hoping to take some of the snippets from it to use in hiring videos, because some principals are giving some very powerful messages as we're talking about this work that I would love to share with everyone, coming directly from their mouths. But at the same time, I want to make sure that stakeholders in the district know what's happening. Also within our community, I did an op-ed for the Courier-Journal talking specifically about this work and how we're trying to create what Bettina Love calls a home place for students.
Who's that again?
Bettina Love.
Oh, yes.
And I talked to Principal Cosby, Rhonda Cosby, the other day at Grace James, and one of the things that she said that struck me was she was like, this work is so important because parents are entrusting us with their children, their heart pieces, is the way that she described it. So she was like, we have the responsibility of taking care of someone's heart, their child. So we can't take that lightly. And as leaders, we have to be brave and seek to understand so that we're able to just highlight the importance of this work and help grow the work across our district.
So I'm just thinking here. So do you have, so thinking about those stories and some of your experiences, education, and also aspirations prior in film, do you have any interest in merging those two and incorporating those two worlds with movies and mayhem, if you will? Well, not mayhem, it's education, right?
Right. I don't know. I think that there's definitely a place for it. Like I said, I do enjoy being a storyteller, and I want to be able to do a lot more of that because I think that that's how people can connect. Like even as I talk to principals, because some of the things some advice that I've given is how to leverage what you do have. So if you don't have strong diversity in your building. Well, what about the guest speakers that you bring in? What about the field trips that your students take? You know, is there any intentionality on bringing in people of various backgrounds, or ensuring that there's cultural aspects to some of the field trips that you're taking? Because there's things that can be leveraged to allow for those mirrors and windows, so to speak, as we are trying to build up the diversity in our various school buildings. So, because that's a recruitment issue too. We have to get more people into the system, but at the same time, in order to work with what we have in the moment, there's some leverage pieces. So I think that having people come in to schools and telling their stories and talking about their culture, or having students share, or parents come in and share, I think can be powerful messages. So I think that stories is a great way to connect people and to allow people to see something that they may have never seen or witnessed before. So I think it can be a very powerful medium for building camaraderie and community.
I agree, and you said a statement that stuck out to me, which is, you said leverage what you do have. So thinking about that, just back to your current role, so based on how your position came about, what you told us about already, and this is a new position or charge in our district, and considering that JCPS and DEP are national leaders when it comes to DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, policies, practices, and supports, basically thinking that how have you been able to connect with some of your counterparts in other public school districts and or the private sector?
I would say more so in the private sector, or just talking with various groups of people. Because one thing I do find is that when I tell people what I do, when that conversation comes up, people are very interested in how we're able to move the work forward. Because there are many people who want to be a part of that work, many people who may be in a position to do that work, but they're not getting the forward movement that we are here in JCPS. So having those discussions and just talking about that progress, I think, can be motivating for folks, because even when they feel stagnated in their current roles, it kind of helps them to be able to point to our organization and say, hey, this is somebody who's doing it. Here's some steps that they're doing to move this work forward. So I think I kind of have an opportunity to become not necessarily a mentor, but maybe a thought partner for folks, just to be able to just talk about it and understand that it's a process and that it can be daunting, but at the same time we can find some key moments or inspirations that we can pass on and show that it's possible, or that the work can happen and that we can be better. You know,
well, that conversation is key, and that's one thing we learned through a lot of the social injustices as well as racial injustices in our community, is that you know, that we need to have the conversation about race and about inequities in our community, and about some of the things that you're speaking of already. And even with that, just think about this for a moment. So one thing that we're trying to push, and we always try to push in JCPS and more specifically in DEP, is this notion of disruptive leadership. Mm-hmm. What do you think of the importance of disruptive leadership?
I think it's absolutely necessary. Because in our role, we're in the business of teaching and caring for children. So we are well aware as adults of the systemic issues that plague many people of color. So just to be very transparent there. So I think that it's crucial to be disruptive, but I will say that disruptive leadership is dangerous. You know, we know that firsthand. And when I say it's dangerous, it doesn't mean that we should back up from it, but we have to be ready for the pushback from folks who want to keep everything as is because it has benefited them most. So, you know,
it's comfortable.
It's very comfortable, and you can even see some of the outrage at board meetings across the country. When we start talking about teaching all perspectives, then we get into, oh, well, you're trying to change history, or you're trying to do, it's like, no, we want to make sure that we understand all of the pieces. So I think that it's crucial that we keep moving this work forward, because we cannot survive as we have in the past. We have to make it better and more equitable for everyone. But I will say it is very dangerous. But at the same time, without risk, there's absolutely no reward. So we have to push. We have to make people uncomfortable. We have to be uncomfortable. I've questioned some of the things that I've done myself over the years. I'm like, wow, why didn't I know better? But I didn't at the time.
Right.
So now it's like, well, when we do know better and we don't, then we're just being negligent. So I just think it's crucial to keep pushing as much as we can.
I love that. I love it. And so, in your role, how do you promote or disrupt or revise current policies?
So based on some of the groundwork that's already been laid through DEP, because I've been in my role since May of this year, one of the things that I do is take what was in place and I try to move it forward. So for example, with working with principals or working with hiring managers, I wanted to tie the cultural competence piece back to research. So that way, this is not what Stephanie White's saying. This is research. This, is found in the literature. Here's some different perspectives that we need to look at through hiring for cultural competence, like making sure that we have some protocols in place so that we have consistency and we're building this system. Making sure that I give pushback when it's appropriate. For example, challenging the notions of, JCPS as a 24/7 operation. As a principal, I think expectations have been that it's a nonstop job. And while it is a very important job and is very time consuming and demanding, at the same time, you have to have some work-life balance. So, one of the things that's been a personal crusade for me is when folks talk about, well, how do you go above and beyond, or how do you show that you're willing to go above and beyond for this or for that? And it's like, well, when did doing my job effectively stop being okay? So I have to,
Yes.
So I push back on some of those things because we can't be so exhausted that we can't think, that we can't reflect and make new decisions. So I really try to, in my role while I am sitting at tables with various role groups in our district, I do make it a point to push back on those things, because if your workforce is exhausted, then we can't grow, because we're not thinking, we're not being reflective, we're not being innovative. So I think it's important that we, really take a look at self-care and how we have a little work-life balance.
Yeah. And like you said, the fact is that, and see if you agree with this, that the way we've been doing things hasn't worked. Mm-hmm. So obviously systematic change, innovation that you mentioned earlier, those things are needed and required in order for us to close gaps and increase educational outcomes, and specifically in our role for students of color. Would you agree?
Oh, completely. I think that you can't move forward if you don't have any rest. That's a basic fundamental principle. Mm-hmm. So I think that when you put people as smart and innovative and intelligent as the workforce that we have in JCPS across the board, we have to have people performing at optimal levels. In order to do that, there has to be balance. There has to be downtime. There has to be time to mend and reflect on progress and next steps.
So part of that personal crusade can't be 24/7, right?
Correct.
So for personally, I was going to ask you this later, but I'm glad you brought it up. How do you practice self-care?
Well,
just personally, and maybe even professionally, but just personally, how do you practice self-care?
There's a few things that I've gone to, some non-negotiables. One is I'm determined to have a work-life balance. I'm determined to have a point where I am no longer working for the day, so that I can spend time with my family, so that I can spend time in my garden or sit out in my backyard and just relax or hang out with my friends.
What do you grow?
A little bit of everything. I have a vegetable garden. So I have some tomatoes and some peppers, and right now I have some collard greens growing and some lettuces. So just different things like that. But I enjoy it. It's quiet. I'm one with the soil. So it's very calming for me. So I enjoy that. But between that, I try to exercise and go to the gym, and I like having a massage. So that's something that's high on my list.
That's so you, like a professional.
Oh yeah, like I have a once a month massage appointment.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah, take care of me.
It's important, like you said. It's so important.
It is.
So thinking, I got a couple more questions, and we'll start to wrap this up. It's been really good talking to you, by the way. What stakeholders? And you mentioned this earlier a little bit about some of the stakeholders with even your Current Journal article and such. But what stakeholders do you, as diversity hiring specialists, work with? Like, are there any stakeholders outside, external stakeholders?
Externally.
Or internal?
Externally, not as much.
You mentioned a lot of internal stakeholders already, but more outside of JCPS.
Outside of JCPS, I think
Community.
probably the biggest informal group that I engage is family and friends, because they consistently have opinions about JCPS and they want to run things by me or tell me something that they heard because they want to find out if things are true.
Well, they want a voice. They
Yeah,
want to provide a
so
voice. That's
we
good.
spend time talking about that in the community. Definitely, internally too. I work a lot with Dr. Shauna Stenton, which I didn't mention earlier, but she's over our site-based decision-making councils. So she and I spend a lot of time together, making sure that things are aligned as far as training, working with councils. She supports the principal selection, so it's a huge piece. But I think just in the community, it's a lot more informal at this time. I do work on a couple of committees with Bellamy University that talks about this type of work and then how it fits into pre-service teaching. So really just as things come up, I definitely am always happy to collaborate and to work with anyone who's engaged in this work.
So obviously partnerships are very important with you in your role.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Partnerships, collaboration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and this is a dangerous question, but just let's put it out here. If you had a magic wand, okay, mm-hmm. what would be your goal, or what would you like to see come out of your role as diversity hiring specialist?
A couple things. Number one, first and foremost, I want Jefferson County Public Schools to be considered an employer of choice. So I want people to clamor to get here so that they can get to do the work that we're doing and get to work with our students. A second thing is I would have more people go into the teaching profession, especially more people of color, because one of the things with this work is, if your pool is limited, there's only so much to draw from. So I would definitely try to have people go into the teaching profession en masse so that we can fill up our classrooms and have a great representation of the various cultures in the U.S.
That's awesome. So that's a huge wand there.
You said it was my favorite.
Man, I should have said one wish. You took two.
Two.
So last question. This is a question that our Chief Equity Officer, whom I should have mentioned at the beginning, who has led this work for years, Dr. John Marshall, he's asked us to pose one question at the end. And this question is really around the highlight. We would like for you to highlight a teacher or educator who influenced you to do the work that you're doing now. Any teacher or educator that really sticks out to you that influenced your work?
Well, I will say that I've always enjoyed school. So I've had great teachers along the way and some that were not so great. But I think as an adult and as an educator, I've had a mentor, Ms. Jackie Austin, who's a retired administrator for JCPS. Worked for years as a principal, director of curriculum, many different things. She worked with me. I was her mentee as a principal. And she taught me a lot about leading, a lot about making decisions, a lot about the danger of the job, and about really making some decisions to say what is best for the kids in your building, what is the best thing for you? What is the best thing to make sure that you're able to really be influential and move the work forward? Even, with writing and things. She's like, the work that you're doing needs to be on a bigger scale. You need to bring people in or bring people along with you. So she really has helped to push me, I guess also to help me be confident, even if something I'm doing is not necessarily a popular choice, but is it the right choice? So I think that she's definitely somebody who's been very influential in my adult life as a leader, with really pushing myself and not being scared to do this dangerous work.
Sounds like Miss Austin needs to write a book.
She's tough. She could. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, leading, decisions, danger, what's best for kids, you, and influence, bringing people in and being confident. That's powerful.
Yeah, she's very intelligent, very tough, and she's been doing this work for 40 years or so. And she's still doing the work, So,
but she's doing the work through you now.
Yeah.
Because honestly, because even through the work, everything you've said thus far, it speaks to everything that Miss Austin instilled. It sounds like, because all those things that now you're doing in your consultations and the work that you're doing as well. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. She's definitely been very influential in my adult career.
Well, that's awesome. It's been so great talking today. I think our listeners are going to love listening to your story and the impact that you have on our district, prior as a principal and teacher, and now in your role as diversity hiring specialist. We look forward to great things going forward. And anything that you'd like to say before we part?
Just that I appreciate the opportunity to work in diversity, equity, and poverty as part of JCPS. I get to work with you all the time, Dwan, which has been fantastic, and many great people in our department and across our school system that just reassures that we are on the right path and that we are doing the work that is necessary for our students. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to be part of it all.
Well, we're glad to have you. Thank you, Dr. Stephanie White, here on the Pillar Podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you.